Social justice is often seen as an anchor for peaceful coexistence. Now, earlier this week, Hlanganisa hosted their first Toka, meaning justice in Setswana, in Parktown, where various stakeholders engaged around the importance of access to social justice in South Africa. Let's get some more perspective on this with Chiedza Chagutah, who is the program manager of Hlanganisa Community Fund for Social and Gender Justice. Thank you for making time for us this afternoon, Chiedza. Let's start perhaps with the challenges that vulnerable groups like women with disabilities face when trying to access justice.
Good afternoon, Clement, and a warm afternoon to your viewers. As you rightfully point out, we have a very solid justice system in South Africa, but it's often, marginalized groups and marginalized populations that don't experience the full extent of this justice on their side, and women with disabilities are that particular group, are one of those groups. You'd find that, just something as simple as reporting a case of gender-based violence to the police station is quite a challenge because our police stations are not equipped to respond to the specific needs that women with disabilities have. The kind of questions that are asked in terms of gathering evidence on those cases do not take into account, some of those sensory disabilities. So, for example, if a blind woman goes into a police station and is asked to describe the perpetrator, the kind of questions that they are asked, are not sensitive to their disabilities. And so there is just a need for our justice system to be more responsive to the needs of those particular groups. And I think the sad part about all this, Clement, is that women with disabilities, and particularly blind women, deaf women, in many cases are not considered as credible witnesses when they take the stand.
So if we want this equal access to justice for women with disabilities, it's going to require, as you have stated, a lot of work, from comprehensive legal reforms to inclusive policies and perhaps even awareness campaigns. What do you think needs to be done? Where do we start?
I think we need to start by building the capacity of our officials within the justice system, just getting them to understand the specific needs of specific groups. Because, if we look at our constitution in South Africa, it talks about equality before the law. So there's an assumption that, we are all at the same footing. And remember, it's not when someone interfaces or engages with the justice system, it's not all of us that are conversant with all the processes, with all the technicalities of the legislative framework. And so it's important for our justice, of public officials in the justice system to take that into account, and it takes a building of capacity. And I think the second thing is just partnering with organizations and structures that are working on the ground that understand the unique needs of these vulnerable groups.
Okay. Let's talk about the high cost of legal representation now. That's a serious obstacle for many individuals seeking justice.
Absolutely, absolutely. Clement, a lot of households in South Africa are currently prioritizing very basic needs because of where the economy is at now. People are barely making ends meet. And so when there is a need to access a lawyer, just the cost of consultation, Clement, is so prohibitive. And I think there's a need for some sort of reform, but for government to provide, to be able to provide more legal aid, particularly to victims and survivors of gender-based violence. We often talk, if you look at the National Strategic Plan of Gender-Based Violence, it talks about centering survivors of violence in the response to gender-based violence. And yet, if we look at the availability of legal aid for survivors compared to perpetrators, it paints a very sad picture. And so there's a need for serious reforms, but there's also a need to look at alternative justice systems that are closer to the people that are in need of accessing that justice. We have a number of partners that we work with as Hlanganisa who are already bridging the gap by providing that support to communities. But there's also a need for intermediaries between the formal justice system and particularly underserved communities to provide basic legal information to those communities, because as things stand now, there's a distance between communities. If you ask an ordinary South African on the street about what justice means to them, it's still a very distant association with justice, and I think that's contrary to the vision of our constitution.
Yeah. What role can civil society play in bridging this gap and addressing these barriers to access justice? Because I imagine that collaboration between civil society and government can lead, to more effective and inclusive justice systems.
I think in acknowledging the barriers to accessing the justice system, we also need to understand that somebody has been picking up the slack of the inefficiencies within our justice system, and that has been civil society organizations. But within the civil society sector itself, there is a section of the civil society that are community-based paralegals who've been doing a lot of important work around addressing the inaccessibility of justice. And I think for us as Hlanganisa, the sad reality is that their work has gone unrecognized. If you were to just ask anyone what is a community-based paralegal, they might not know about the important work that community-based paralegals are doing. But as Hlanganisa, we are currently supporting over 60 community-based paralegals in the country, and we find that on a day-to-day basis, the kind of work that they are doing is really picking up on the slack of, the systemic failures within the justice system itself. And I think it's important for the Department of Justice and other stakeholders in the justice system to acknowledge this work, because they're already bridging that gap. They're already providing basic legal empowerment in their communities. They are just orienting their communities in terms of what the formal justice system entails. They accompany clients to court, because you can imagine how intimidating it is to walk into a court for the first time. You're asked questions. You need to remember information that you didn't think was important. So they are playing a very, very critical role. And as Hlanganisa, what we are doing is we are funding the operations of those community-based paralegals in their communities, because a lot of them are servicing communities that don't have much, who already failed from a service delivery point of view. And so just to keep their doors open and just letting, South Africans interface with the justice system in a more productive way, and in that way be equal before the law.
Are they getting sufficient support from government, these community-based paralegals, so far apart from the support they get from organizations like yourselves? I mean, seeing the kind of valuable work that they do, that support from government can come in handy.
Not enough, Clement. Currently, the biggest advocacy issue with community-based paralegals is around the recognition of them as a profession, but also the regulation of the sector. And I think, there's a lot more that our government could be doing now, especially from a financial resourcing point of view. A lot of them are struggling to have office space. Like I said, a lot of them are just basically trying to keep their doors open because there's a high demand for their services in the communities. So financial resourcing from the national fiscus would make a big difference in terms of the work that they're doing. And when I talk about financial resourcing, it's not extravagant costs that they're looking to cover. A lot of them, it's rent, like I said, communication that just transport from one location to another where there is a court, or where they need to refer a case to a lawyer. It's really basic cost, and I think it's something that the government should be, it's cost that the government should be covering, because they're essentially doing the work that the justice system should be doing. A lot of these communities claimants are hundreds of kilometers away from the nearest court, from the nearest police station. And like I said, someone has been picking up the slack, and community-based paralegals have been doing a big part of that work.
All right, Chiedza Chagutah, Program Manager of the Hlanganisa Community Fund for Social and Gender Justice. Thank you for joining us for this important conversation.